Welcome to The Fix,
the new way to get your copy reviewed by two former copy chiefs.
because whether you're an aspiring copywriter or you've been in the industry for decades,
The best way to improve your work isn't to read books, blog posts, or online guides.
it's to see real writing, your writing, being reviewed and improved in front of your eyes.
And that's the goal of The Fix, to bring you inside a virtual writer's room
And watch along as we review, edit and rewrite real copy.
from real writers like you. So let's get straight into this week's episode. And remember, if you like what you see here,
Please share The Fix with anyone you think would find it valuable. It is completely free. Hello and welcome to another episode of The Fix. Now, we've been doing this for over half a year and we're yet to review any copy from the world of finance, which of course is where I spend all of my time, and it's where Glenn made his start in the world of copywriting, and he still spends a lot of his time working on finance as well. So we thought we would break that duck today and look at a piece of copy from the world of finance. So let's bring it up on the screen right now. We'll get stuck straight in, shall we? As always, I'll read some of the copy, but not all of it, and then maybe we'll refer back to it. So this is a piece of copy. The headline begins, Boom Bust Insider Mastermind Group with Phil Anderson and Akhil Patel. If you want to understand how, why, and when the booms and busts in the world economy are likely to occur, then you're in the right place. The Boom Bust Insider Mastermind Group is for private investors and business leaders who understand that being able to correctly time the boom and bust cycle is a key edge. Imagine knowing that you're on the right side of the markets months or years ahead of time. How about knowing years in advance when the real estate or stock market is most likely to peak? What would it mean for you if you could get out or position yourself near the peak of the market and be ready for the downturn when it comes? Wouldn't you prefer to exit your portfolio or your company at the best time before a crash takes hold? How about being able to increase and decrease your exposure to the markets at precisely the right times? Sounds impossible? No, not impossible. Far from it, in fact. If you know anything about Phil Anderson and Akhil Patel, you'll know that this is very much possible and precisely what they've been teaching their subscribers for years. Literally thousands of subscribers can testify to these amazing calls that Phil and Akhil have made in the past. Right, we'll take it off screen there and we'll dig into it. Perhaps we'll bring it back on if we want to do a bit more. So a bit of a disclosure first. So I know Phil and Akhil, so I know a little bit more about the idea that they build their work around. So I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of that into the discussion, but we will try and keep things tight to the copy itself, because I think that's...
Yeah, and I'll hide the fact that I know Phil.
Yeah.
And briefly have met Akhil, but have spent some time with Phil in comical situations.
Yeah, so they're both lovely chaps, and they have a great and very interesting way of looking at the world and a great little business around it. In fact, I actually asked Akhil to send some copy in months and months and months ago. He also sent me a copy of his book, which I'm supposed to be reviewing.
I wondered what you was going to say then. I didn't know what else he was sending you. But yeah.
I haven't reviewed it yet, but I'll get back to that. Anyway, so that's the disclosures out of the way. One point I thought I'd make, because I think it's useful to this, before we dig into the copy itself, I think 80 to 90% of copy in the financial world operates on a very similar level. Now, this is going to make me sound more cynical than perhaps I mean it, but I do think there is a kind of pattern, and there's different ways of trying to explain that same pattern. So lots of what you do in the financial world is about the fact that the world is chaos, the world doesn't make sense, but the people we appeal to and the people who consume our products are searching for that hidden order, that hidden thing that makes sense of the world. Now, you could argue that that's not just about finance, that's, all of the world, could be reduced to those kind of templates of like, there's chaos and then there's order. In fact, I talked about this when we did our idea session, didn't I?
I should have worn my goatee today. So
but it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Like there's so much information coming to us. There seems to be no pattern to it. There's a narrative imposed on it by the media, but that doesn't really explain what's actually happening. And so people are often searching for the story underneath the story. What's the order? What's the hidden pattern? The hidden thing everyone's missing? Because if I can understand that, maybe I can understand what's coming next. Not in terms of day to day to day, but the big moves in the markets could maybe be predicted. Now, I'd argue there are ways of looking at the markets like that. This is one of them. So that's my way of getting into what the idea is, which is that Phil and Akil study cycles. There's a specific cycle, I won't get into too much detail, but it explains when the markets are likely to rise, when they're likely to fall over a period of about 2 decades, and then there's sort of way stations on that. So it's almost like a roadmap of the future. So it does tie into other financial products, but it's specific in its own right. I always keep that idea in mind that, well, what's the hidden order? How can I get into that space? Because I think that's what motivates people to buy in this world. So I'm always trying to find a way of prodding at that nerve. So it might be a metaphor, it might be an analogy, or it might not be. It might be a completely different technique. But I'm always trying to approach that, I think, because I think it's a powerful idea.
Yeah, and an addendum, I'm using the word addendum.
Yeah, go for it.
I don't know if that's the right word.
No,
Is that just a legal speak addendum?
I think you've used it in the right
Anyway, an addendum to that is that, yes, there is that universal underlying thing to the financial world that you're looking for order in the chaos. I fully agree with that. And it also lends into something that I'll have said before, and I'll say it again, but I feel it is particularly the case in the financial world, is that people are looking, ultimately, do you know something I don't? And it's the kind of the same thing, is there some order here that I've not seen, I've missed this out? And I think with what Phil and Akil are doing here, this whole cyclical nature of markets, and we should point out it's the philosophy behind their ideas are actually bigger than finance. There are cycles to everything, and obviously I read a lot of philosophy and what have you, and that's a big, deep subject, which I'm kind of putting there because I think part of the problem with this copy is that it doesn't really fully explore that, and I think there's so much more to go there. But I'll leave that. But I think it's is there order to the chaos, and do I know something, or in this case, does Phil and
what do they know that I don't?
What do they know that I don't? And that is your starting point for where your reader is for this piece of copy.
Well, I think it's important as well, because by framing the way you work in finance around those kinds of ideas, what you avoid doing is falling into the trap of just saying, well, it's finance, so the goal is to promise that they'll make lots of money, because the reader just wants to make lots of money, don't they? Yeah. And you often get copywriters talk about that, and you think, no, that's not true. Also, why have you reduced your job to that? It's so shallow.
Yeah.
But and of course, that's going to be a part of what you do in the world of finance. Why else would somebody be investing other than to make money? Yeah. But it's implicit, right? Yeah. You don't need to over-promise and hammer away at that, because you can reduce everything to that.
Yeah.
It's like, well, okay, here's another thing that you could make you money. I always think I never want to get trapped in that register.
That's the end game. We really work in, as a creative copywriter, if you like, we work in, you're always going, and the sentence ends, and therefore you make a load of cash. But it's the bit before the end of that sentence, and how far back or how long do you make that sentence? That's where we're operating. Yeah. Yes, remember that implicitly the sentence ends, and therefore you will make loads of money. And we know that. That's where we talk about greed and all this kind of stuff. But it's where we operate in the start of the sentence.
Idea.
That's the idea.
That's the unique thing.
Yeah.
And if you, just on a general sort of, your life being edifying enough to keep you going, if you don't have that part, if all you've got is and therefore you make lots of money, I often think, how are you going to do this your whole life?
Yeah. Then we cut to Disney's Soul.
Is that all you're going to do? No, I often see that from copywriters, not usually in other countries actually, in the States actually. But I just sort of think, is that all you want to just promise they'll make loads of money? So you're going to write 12 promotions a year for 40 years saying the same thing. Don't you want it to be a bit more interesting?
Bleakest summation of a copywriter's life.
But it is really bleak, and there's people that write like that. Anyway, so you always want to start, I always try and think about that relationship between order and chaos, because it pushes me up into that space. Right, let's look at the copy itself.
So I was going to say, so with regards to the copy then, that leads us straight in, and I had some other thoughts when I briefly glimpsed at this as we sat down, but I actually missed the first bit, where the classic kind of, if you want to do things, there's debates of whether that's the right way in. but the when we're thing, and then straight away naming the product or service or whatever you like. I'm straight in. I've made my decision. I'm out if I'm not interested, and all this kind of stuff. Yet this is such an interesting thing that I think, with the whole cycles as a product or service or whatever thing, but it's like a lot of people won't know they are interested in this, and a lot of people who are financially investing in what have you, what might not realize that this is a thing that will affect their portfolios, affect their investments and all this kind of stuff. So I just thought a really technical thing straight away is using that. If you want to do this, then you want to use this product. I feel like that's a lost opportunity on this. I think that should at least drop down to the middle of the thing. So it's something interesting first about the cycles, the line, imagine knowing that you're on the right side of the markets and stuff like that. It's not the strongest line as an opener, but that's where we're going. We're speaking to that core emotion that we're saying, and that narrative, what we're talking about here. Imagine if there was order in the chaos. Imagine if you could, and therefore you could make a load of money, would be a stronger line than do you want to know when, where, how thingy. It's just, that feels a bit weak as an opening.
Yes, I think that's true. I think there's 2 points I'd make, actually 3. So I'm going to make 2 sort of superficial points, and then I'm going to make a suggestion. So just to bring the copy back up on the screen again, that first line begins, if you want to understand how, why, and when the booms and busts in the world economy are likely to occur, just on an editing level, you don't want to be how or why in your opening line, because those are how it happens, I don't care yet. Why it happens, I don't care yet. I will at some point. It's when that's the important thing. Ultimately, that's the emotional thing. If you want to make sure you get out of the market before it crashes, that's really what I was trying to say, or in before it booms. So I would just be careful about loading too much how and why in. It's the wrong, again, it's the wrong sort of register, and it's rational, appealing to. So I'd be careful about that. And also, the second point would be that then within the first 10 lines of copy, there's quite a lot of questions.
Yep.
And I often think that's a great example of maybe a draft. It's a drafting process. You're getting them down. They're exactly the right questions to ask. So just, wouldn't you prefer to exit your portfolio or company at the best time? What would it mean for you if you couldn't get out or position yourself near the peak of the market? Yeah, okay, these are the right questions to be asking ourselves.
Yep.
But in the copy, I don't know what the answer to those things are. So I think I'd try and copy cliche alert, try and show it rather than telling it a little bit more. So you can, the great thing about writing about cycles is you can look at past cycles. Now I happen to know that Phil and Akil have a great track record of using this cycle to make great calls about the markets in the past. So that's your chance to kind of tell that story in a completely different show. So rather than like, imagine you could get out before the next crash. If you try and tell it as a story, you say it's September 2008 and the world's about to descend into the abyss. You start a story there at the height of the financial crisis. Then you could say something about what's going on. The headline. I'm going to do it in sort of copy loose terms, but you know the spirit of what I'm saying. Like you could say the banks are on the brink. There's panic in the media. Nobody seems to know what to do. George Bush is panicking. So is Gordon Brown. I'd cut some of this stuff, but I'd amp up that chaos and then say, but imagine you're not. Yeah. You've already sold out of everything 6 months before. So you sort of immediately show that, that would have been good, wouldn't it? So you don't need to ask me, that's you. Then you could say, fast forward on to 2011. A lot of people are saying, there's another bus just around the corner. Yada, 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 yada. But you're not. In fact, you're moving in, and maybe you even put a graphic on screen that says, you sell here, you buy here, you double down here. And then you say, as incredible as any of this sounds, I'm going to introduce you to 2 men who could have shown you exactly how to do this. And then you go back through there. That would show that story and make me feel those things.
I'm smiling because literally it's always, whenever you speak, it's the first things that are in your head, which is worrying because I've been reading about anarchists recently. But this morning, coming down to London, on the train, I was working on a promotion that we're working on together. And because we're riffing back and forth, I'm aware that you'll read it. And then I was sat there thinking, right, am I writing? So I'm trying to show and not tell in this piece, and show to other copywriters and what have you. And I thought, well, should I? Is this too specific to my experience and my kind of what I've felt? And then I was thinking, oh, no, I think this is right. This will either connect or it won't. But if it does connect, it will connect incredibly strongly. And I think that's our job as copywriters, is to commit to either connecting really strongly or not at all. Because if something like this, where you go, if you're up for this, you will never have a breakthrough promotion. You will never go flying high. You might say it might work. You're not saying it won't work, but it won't connect on a big scale, and you won't have any breakthrough with that. So, because what I'm thinking is, when you say, oh, well, how do you show it? It's really hard.
Oh, of course.
It's really hard to answer all of those questions. And your natural gut is to go and imagine if this did happen, because I can't imagine it. I don't know how to express it. That's what writing is. It's really, really hard. And I think that's worth like disclaiming. You've got to spend. But the reason you do it is because, as I say, it's only by committing to that. And you might get it wrong. And you might have to do a load of tests to figure out what does universally commit to people. But it goes back to, I always use The Wire, the American TV series, as an example. It's writing. They wrote that show for the drug dealers and the cops. And because they wrote it incredibly authentically, and for that cop to go, wow, they've got that specific detail, and the druggie to go, yep, that's exactly what it's like doing a re-up and all this stuff. The rest of us watch it going, wow, I'm connecting to that because I appreciate that. So you've got the people who are genuine going, yeah, I've got that. And then people who aren't just going, that just looks like a thing. And that's where we need to operate. And that's where this copy is not operating. It's just trying to go, if anybody's interested in this, and it's our job to push that a little bit further. And it's kind of a generic thing. I feel like we do it a lot, but I've realized now that in looking at copy, what you are reviewing, the whole process of reviewing copy, whether we're doing it or you're doing it yourself, is to say, what's the next bit? If I just take that another step further and another, to actually kind of just take it that extra bit. So that's why I think that advice comes from us a lot. But it is just what if you answered that question? What if you answered it yourself and felt what it would be like to be in that situation, kind of thing. So I think that needs a bit of that.
It's true, and let's just bring the copy back up on screen again, because let's look at the sort of the next part of it, or sort of the bottom part of the left-hand side. So actually we have these questions. So the last one is, how about being able to increase and decrease your exposure to the markets at precisely the right time? Sound impossible? No, not impossible. Well, the problem I had there was, it sounds great. It doesn't sound impossible, because you've brought it to me in a sort of abstract sense. Wouldn't it be great to get everything right about the markets? Whereas if you said these two men have on this, imagine you were able to sell here, buy here, sell here, buy here, and then contrast that to what else is going on. Then you say, does that sound impossible? Well, yes, it does, because it sounds like you can see the future, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. But then that question works. Sounds impossible. Well, give me 2 minutes of your time, and I'll show you why. Being, you could hear the next prediction from these two experts, or I can invite you into the world where this is possible, and all of a sudden it's like, well, I want to be in a room with them. So you have to amplify.
Yeah,
really.
words are. I'll raise this as well. It's a little bit more abstract to thought, but words are very powerful. Obviously, let's just roll out George Orwell and he starts saying, but if you put a word on the page and if you say it sounds impossible, I am now thinking it sounds impossible. Do you as the writer want me to be thinking it's impossible? And the truth is, if you really think it to it, say, no, we don't want to be thinking about impossibility in this. This is a positive, exciting thing. And I think people need to think about that. Going back to the thing I was working on later on, there was just a line that it said it doesn't matter. Now, the idea behind it was to be positive. It doesn't matter. Don't worry about it, is what you're saying. But actually, it doesn't matter. It means that everything before that has just become, well, it doesn't matter. Why am I even talking about it? What's the point of it? It does matter. Everything matters. And it's that kind of positivity. It makes me think, I've just watched the Kanye West documentary. I don't know if
which is fantastic.
Which is fantastic. But he goes a little bit wrong at the end. But he does this thing where he's analysing everything as though, oh no, that's got negatives in it. I need to make it positive, which whatever, it's a sad thing where he's that kind of thing. But part of it, and part of the sadness, is you're kind of right. Like, that's really good. But as a copywriter, you look at your copy. Are you putting negative thoughts in place? And are you bringing these issues? Are you making walls for yourself saying, sounds impossible? Now you've got to explain why it's possible. When really, if you came at it like going, oh no, this is possible and it's happening, I believe you. Like, so just think about words like impossible, really negative things you're thinking about. Do you really want that thought to be with the reader? Because you can probably just turn it around really quickly.
Or you can go the other way. So I agree with you with the word impossible, but let's say really what you're doing is calling out an objection, then trying to deal with it.
Yeah.
So generally what you might say something like, if you're thinking that sounds too good to be true, I'm with you.
Yes.
So you then say something like, you know, when I first heard it, I thought the same thing. Some variation of that. These are copy cliches.
It's the car salesman thing, isn't it? It's that same world where it's like, you're speaking to the point where you're acknowledging that, yeah, there are like weird things that happen, and there are like cliches and all this stuff, but don't worry, I'm not part of this. But it's like, but you kind of are, because you've followed the cliche yourself.
But when you're blocking out something structurally, I think it's fine, because we're talking about a drafting process. So I think some form of that sounds too good to be true or whatever. You're gonna have to freshen that phrase up. But then probably what you need to do, so you've made a claim, you've tried to show it. That was my suggestion. We're going to show you that you could have bought here, sold here, bought here, sold here. Then you say, if that sounds too good to be true, you then tend to have to offer a different kind of proof up. So for instance, that's where, just to bring the copy up again, it says, if you know anything about these guys, literally thousands of subscribers can testify to these amazing calls. Okay, that means nothing to me unless you say, sounds too good to be true. I thought so too. Then I saw literally thousands of emails that from people just like you who've done this, and then show those. So you draw out, you ask the reader to imagine a world that's fantastic, where they're one step ahead of the world at every phase. Then you say, well, if you think it's impossible, just look at these guys, and you say it is possible. You show those testimonials. All of a sudden, I think the copy, you're closer to the reader thinking, I want to know more about this, and then you can start to lay in some of those differences.
Two things. That line that you just said about if you know anything, that triggered me a little bit when I read it. But at the same time, before I explain why, I think it's worth for the writer behind this piece of copy. It seems like we're just going line by line and saying this is wrong, this is wrong. There's a reason we're doing that, because overall I don't think it's wrong.
None of it's wrong,
I think it's very aware copy, and what I mean by that is it's clearly written by someone who gets copy and who understands what they're doing. But what my gut reaction to this was that it was from someone who would be quite early in writing copy in their longer career, if you like. And the reason I think that is because every line, and therefore the reason we're able to kind of go through every line, is because every line's got a copy idea in it, as though they've just got as much copy stuff out as they can. When you get a bit older at the game, you realise that you can take much more time over these things. So I just don't want it to be like a full this is all. It's actually, you can take your time on these things. So like, you've got this whole story opening, you've got you've got Phil and Akil's credibility and all these things. You could probably, whatever this is, whether it's a landing page or an email or whatever, you could probably just riff on one idea. And that's not to say always focus on one idea. I'm just saying the potential is here to do that. And I think the copywriter would be able to do that. But it's just because you've got so much stuff in there, each one's like not been polished. So with that, if you know anything about these, it straight away put me away. Even though I kind of do know about them, I try and read all copy with as little baggage as possible, and went, no, I don't know anything about them, therefore I feel further away from this copy and this opportunity. And I think that's a really subtle but dangerous thing that you can play. There's better ways of doing it, of showing their credibility. But if you're saying, I think it says, if you know anything about them, it's like, it's trying to speak to people who might, I assume, on a list that are going to receive this, but they already know about Phil and Akil, so you don't need to speak to them. You need to speak to people who don't know about them.
Well, you go either way.
Phrasing it slightly different would be better than saying, if you don't know anything about these people, and then later on you say they're really good, it just feels mealy-mouthed to me.
It's in a slightly strange place. And by the way, I agree with you because we're probably going into quite a lot of depth quite quickly, but I would say that's generally because the copy is in the right direction. It's kind of like a good early draft, I would say.
Yeah.
But then you just say, okay, well, if you're gonna talk about being one step ahead of the markets, how can you do that better?
Yeah.
If you're gonna talk about track record, how can you bring that in?
Yeah.
It's all there. You're just tightening it up, and that's what the drafting process is. But that line, sort of halfway through the lead, if you know anything about them, is a little bit confusing because you could say, you could take that logic that you just laid out, which is, well, I don't, and therefore you've excluded me in that sentence. However, you could go the other way and say, just write to people that already know you and sell them your product.
Yeah.
So but then you need to have it much earlier.
Yeah.
You don't need the warm up. You could say, hi, I'd like to invite you to spend an afternoon.
I guess it's trying to. It is a short piece of copy, and I feel like there might be some more afterwards or what have you. But I feel like it is suffering because it's trying to do too much at once, and ultimately you can't do that. Like you just can't. I know a marketer might tell you this or whatever, or frameworks that we use in the industry might say, no, you need to do this in 1,000 words, but like try and fight against that, because you will have a stronger piece of copy if you focused on 3 of the things that I mentioned here. If you just told them about the boom bust kind of the fact that cycles exist and you can do this, you had some credibility, and then you go, do you want to find out more, kind of thing. It's about balancing, like when you've got when you're convinced about the idea, it's a really hard thing to gauge. But I think with this, there's so much information that I'm not in a place to decide if I'm sold on the idea.
Perhaps there's actually 2 strategies here. So this is a level up from just the draft itself. So you're approaching it from the point of view of what's the brief I'm getting from a marketer or from the business owner. So right now, I would say the strategy in the lead is we're going to sell them on this idea that you can stay one step ahead. Then we're going to invite you to join us, right? There is another idea or another strategy, which is lots of people already know us. We've been around a long time, and now we're offering a training course about that. In which that's a completely different strategy, not radically different copy, but that piece of copy doesn't require you to open with the imagine this, imagine that. No. That might come later, just almost like.
But you're probably selling access to the people.
Yeah, so you might use it because it's going to be highly emotive, but you might do something like, it's basically condensing 30 years worth of market study down into an 8-week course. To somebody who already knows your work, and I know both of them have been around a long time and will have a following of sorts.
That's how Phil knows about cycles, because he's seen them all. He's literally, he's like Kronos.
But like you could go down that route and say, do a pure invite for people who know us, and you still want to lay out the benefits.
Yeah.
But the benefit might be different. So rather than there is a cycle, you might say, they'll tell you where we are in the cycle now, what the smartest things to do with your money right now are, what to look out for when the next phase of the cycle starts. So this is sort of levels of awareness, but actually you can break that into 2 strategies. One that appeals to people that already know us, so that's a more direct offering. Another that appeals to people who don't know us. And so we're going to go in a slightly more idea-driven way. We're going to talk about cycles and staying one step ahead, and then we're going to transition into that. Lots of the copy in those 2 promotions will be exactly the same. You're going to sort of switch it around. But at the moment, maybe there's a little bit of both going on. And if you have to say something like, if you've heard of us before, you'll already know. You sort of think, well, who are you writing to then? Way easier to say, this one's for these people, this one's for these people. Our audience is clear. These people know us, these people don't, and we'll talk to them in 2 different ways. Actually, on a sort of strategic level, it's easier then to say, do you know what? Why don't I write 2 rather than 1? And actually, that's something I often find myself doing. Like, well, actually.
I think it's probably we're starting having done it for decades, but like the more you realise that, and you see copy, and why is there bad copy in the world? No one sat there, well, I assume, sat there going, right, I'm going to write something terrible today. You've been put there to do this thing, and it's committee or whatever, and they're pushed that way, and it's like, oh, we need to get this thing out. But it is by just following like strict things that everybody's done. But the more you realise, you go, oh, it's because you're trying to speak to like 3 different people, which then you also realise through experience is silly, because there's no point in doing that because it's going to undermine itself and all this kind of stuff. So it would be better to go to the annoyance of, I don't know what I was going to say, arse. I don't know why I'm not, I've stopped myself swearing twice today. It's I'm just a cleaner guy these days, less blue. I'll just start really swearing in the next
episode.
Yeah. But yeah, it's an arseache to do a split test and do all this stuff while we don't do that. And it's like, well, actually, it's going to be more of an arseache to see this campaign fail, miss half of those people, and then do it again, and someone's got sacked and lost their job since then because you didn't make enough money in the start. So it's just about sitting back and going, actually, logically, let's just test this one against this one, and we might be able to do that.
Well, why don't we wrap it up like this? Because I think you could say that most, if you want to be really simplistic, most pieces of copy that don't work, it's one of two reasons. You don't know what you're trying to say yourself, or you don't know who you're saying it to. Sometimes it's both. I would say this is a piece of copy that knows what it's trying to say. It has an idea behind it, the idea of the cycle. It has an emotional thrust. Wouldn't it be great to stay one step ahead? Great. Tick, 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 tick. Okay, we started the show by talking about how can we take that from maybe sort of 5 or 6 out of 10 up to 8 or 9? How can we storify it and show it a bit more? But the messaging isn't going to change. But there is a slight issue that we've discovered as we've dug into the copy in who are you writing this to? You can solve that by just deciding. It's as simple as that. Decide who it's for, and a lot of the answers to your questions will be sort of solved in a quite straightforward way. And actually, I always find when I'm really struggling with a piece of copy, it's usually one of those things that has to be resolved. And at the end of a meeting where you finally figure it out, well, let's just go for these people. Don't worry about those people, or whatever it might be. You just feel that sense of relief of like, yes,
totally.
I wasn't clear on that, and I've only now articulated it to myself that I wasn't clear.
And I think with this, straight away, I can see the copy where you can just see, because you're not quite sure who you're going to, or you've not chosen who you're going to, and because therefore you're just throwing it all, the whole like arsenal at the, I think it said armour actually at some point in it, which made it a defensive play. So there's loads of stuff like that where it's like, it's good copy stuff, but because you're throwing all these, everything in your arsenal at it, then you kind of like, oh, I'm lost. I know when the writer sits back and goes, right, let me think how I can express this particular question in a better way. They'll suddenly have, let's say this is probably 1,200 words, they'll have 1,200 words just for that one idea, because they'll know who they're speaking to and they'll know what they want to say and how to express it. And that's what I can kind of already see that. So it's with misbehaving by being further down the line, you'll probably be able to write 5 or 6 versions of this, each with different ideas. You might want to put the other 5 ideas as a bullets at the end to tease on and appease whoever the manager is or whatever the business is. But just stop, think about it, and just take it to that next level.
And there'll be multiple stories just to kind of round this whole episode out. You know, I started by talking about 2008 because that's around the time I started my career, so that's kind of where I reset to. But there's probably other stories. There's the coronavirus crash in the markets, which I know ties into this cycle in its own way. So maybe you start the story there. Maybe you start the story the day of the Brexit vote. Maybe you start the story. There'll always be, so you could test a few things there. It's this day, you don't know what to do. It's the morning of the Brexit vote. Markets are in turmoil. Again, chaos. What if you knew what to do? So there's various different ways of testing that. And then there's probably at least two strategies. I think we'll wrap things up there. We could get into this in a lot more detail. I think you can tell that me and Glenn have spent most of our careers writing about finance in one way or another, because we start to get very technical on these things very quickly. But obviously this is my bread and butter, so I really enjoyed going through the copy for Akil and Phil's business. Thank you very much to the team over there for sending us their copy. As always, you can send your copy in and we'll take a look at it and try and help you improve it, smash through any roadblocks you might have, figure out if your strategy's right or whatever it might be. So send us your copy if you can. Glenn, I think we'll wrap things up there. So thank you very much, everybody, and goodbye.
And there we have it. We hope you got something valuable out of today's episode of The Fix.
Maybe it sparked an idea or two for your next writing project. Maybe it triggered a new headline, opening line, or story to tell your reader.
Maybe it inspired you to scrap what you have and start over. Or maybe it made you want to submit your current work in progress for a little constructive feedback. If that is the case, send your copy to us at feedback@thefixcopywriting.com. Or if you don't want us to review a specific piece of writing, send us a problem you're trying to solve.
Or a challenge you want input on, and we'll do our best to help.
And remember, if you like The Fix, please do share it with other writers, business owners, and marketers.